Hey guys, it's Mrs. Klein.
And Mr. Creighton. We're here with your Lesson 40 podcast on the Enlightenment.
The last podcast of the year.
One. If you open your textbooks to page 565 and follow through to 575, you can follow along with us. And the question is, how have the ideas of the Enlightenment influenced modern government?
All right, as always, you guys, there's some vocabulary terms. They are Bill of Rights, constitutional monarchy, despotism, enlightenment, natural rights, religious tolerance, social contract, and separation of powers.
All right, so again, looking at the introduction on page 565. During the late 1600s, a new outlook put great emphasis on reason as the key to human progress. This period of new thinking among many educated Europeans is called the Enlightenment, and by the 1700s had become widespread throughout Europe.
All right, scientists use observation and logic to understand the physical world, and their methods rapidly overturned old beliefs. In France, philosophers championed these new ideas. In this lesson, you will learn about the roots of the Enlightenment. You'll meet 5 philosophers whose ideas greatly influenced the Enlightenment and see how their works led to new ideas about government and individual rights. Finally, you'll meet several women who played important roles in the Enlightenment.
All right, looking at section 1, the roots of the Enlightenment. Enlightenment thinkers wanted to examine human life in the light of reason. These thinkers believed that they were making a major break with the past. Like everyone, however, they were influenced by what had come before them. In this section, we will first examine the roots of the Enlightenment and then consider ways in which the new ideas of the Enlightenment clash with old beliefs.
In science, observation and reason were revealing natural laws that applied throughout the physical world. The thinkers of the Enlightenment wanted to apply this approach to human life and experience. Philosophers didn't always agree about the answers to these questions, but they all thought about these questions in a similar way.
The humanists of the Renaissance questioned accepted beliefs and celebrated the dignity and worth of the individual. During the Reformation, Protestants rebelled against the Catholic Church by putting individual conscience ahead of religious tradition and authority.
All right, like the humanists of the Renaissance, many Enlightenment thinkers were inspired by classical culture. They saw the laws of nature as the work of an intelligent creator and human progress as a sign of God's goodness. Often their approach to moral problems reflected Christian values such as respect for others and for a moral law.
The thinkers of the Enlightenment prized reason over authority, questioned the foundations of religion, morality, and government, and believed that everything must be re-examined in the light of reason.
Enlightenment thinkers also criticized accepted ideas about government. Some questioned the long-held belief that God gave monarchs the right to rule, and many insisted that governments must respect individual rights.
All right, looking at section 2, Thomas Hobbes, Absolute Rule by Kings. Thomas Hobbes was born in England in 1588. Hobbes studied mathematics and science, which inspired him to take a scientific approach to problems of human society. Hobbes' thinking about society was greatly influenced by events in England in the mid-1600s.
In 1649, the king was beheaded. For the next several years, England was ruled by Parliament's House of Commons. The chaos of these years had a powerful impact on Hobbes.
In 1651, he published a book called Leviathan, in which he wrote that people are divided by a restless desire for power. People are driven by a restless desire for power. Without laws or other social controls, people will always be in conflict, and in such a state of nature, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. Governments, Hobbes believed, were created to protect people from their own selfishness.
All right, moving on to John Locke and natural rights. John Locke was born in England in 1632, and Locke favored constitutional monarchy. In this type of government, a basic set of laws limits the ruler's power. In the 1680s, another crisis developed. The new King James II was Catholic. In 1689, Parliament gave the crown to James' Protestant daughter, Mary, and her husband William. Parliament also passed a Bill of Rights, which strengthened the power of Parliament as the representative of the people.
Locke approved of these changes in England. In 1690, he published 2 treatises of government, in which he offered a theory of government that justified Parliament's actions. Locke denied the divine right of monarchs to rule and argued that the true basis of government was a social contract or agreement among free people. Under this agreement, the purpose of government was to protect people's natural rights, including the right to life, liberty, and property. In 1776, his ideas would be echoed in the American Declaration of Independence.
All right, moving on to Montesquieu, a separation of powers. Charles Louis de Secondat, born in France in 1689, is better known by his title, the Baron de Montesquieu. Montesquieu's most famous book was The Spirit of Laws, published in 1748. In this book, he described his theory of how government should be organized. Like John Locke, Montesquieu was concerned with how to protect political liberty. The best way to do that, he argued, was to divide power among 3 branches of government.
This concept, which Montesquieu called the separation of powers, would ensure that no one branch would become too powerful. Montesquieu's ideas had a powerful impact on later thinkers, including the men who wrote the U.S. Constitution. They made the separation of power a key part of the United States system of government.
I'm just going to interject you guys. Next year in 8th grade, all of this is going to come back. Okay, all right. This has a profound effect on how things roll here in the United States.
And it's why the president isn't like a king.
There we go. All right, section 5 is about Voltaire, religious tolerance, and free speech. François-Marie Arouet was born in France in 1694. Under the pen name Voltaire, he became one of the most celebrated writers of the Enlightenment.
Voltaire believed passionately in reforming society in the name of justice and human happiness. In his view, the English were governed by law, not by the arbitrary wishes of a single ruler.
Voltaire was especially concerned with freedom of thought and expression. He championed religious tolerance, or allowing people to practice religion their own ways. Voltaire also spoke out for the right of free speech.
Voltaire's ideas about religious tolerance and free speech greatly influenced colonial American political thinkers, such as Thomas Jefferson. They deemed that freedom of religion and free speech be included in the U.S. Bill of Rights.
All right, moving on to section 6 about Cesar Beccaria, the rights of the accused. Cesar Beccaria was born in Milan, Italy in 1738. And in 1763, he began a study of the justice system. He was upset by the harsh practices that were common in his day.
Beccaria objected to other practices as well. It was not unusual for trials to be held in secret or for judges to be corrupt. People found guilty of crimes were frequently sentenced to death. Beccaria attacked these practices in the famous book called On Crimes and Punishment.
Beccaria also argued for other specific rights, including the right to a fair and speedy trial for persons accused of a crime and an end to the use of torture. In addition, he felt that it was wrong to punish some people more harshly than others for the same crime, and that a punishment should fit the seriousness of the crime.
His ideas about rights and punishment influenced reform movements throughout Europe. In the United States, many laws concerning crime and punishment reflect his ideas.
All right, let's move on to section 7, the impact of the Enlightenment on government. A few European absolute monarchs tried to apply Enlightenment ideas in the 1700s. These rulers, including Frederick the Great of Prussia, Catherine the Great of Russia, and Joseph II of Austria, became known as enlightened despots or benevolent despots. Benevolent means to be kind and do good for others.
The ideas of the Enlightenment greatly influenced leaders of the American Revolution. The U.S. Constitution also contains ideas from the Enlightenment. In 1789, a revolution broke out in France, and the absolute monarchy there was overthrown. All of these ideas grew out of the Enlightenment.
All right, moving on to Section 8, Women of the Enlightenment. The women of the 1700s did not enjoy the same rights or status as men, and yet a number of women played an important role in the Enlightenment.
One of the most prominent sponsors of salons was Madame Marie-Thérèse Rodot-Geoffroy. Beginning in the mid-1700s, the brightest minds in Europe met in her home for lively talks about the latest ideas.
All right, now Abigail Adams. She firmly supported the American colony struggle for independence from England. During the war, she reminded John, who was her husband, not to forget women's rights in the new American government.
French Olympe de Gouges was the daughter of a butcher. In 1791, she published the Declaration of the Rights of Women and of the Female Citizen. De Gouges argued for women's equality in every aspect of public and private life.
All right, finally, English writer Mary Wollstonecraft was another early leader in the struggle to gain equal rights for women. In an essay published in 1792, she argued that women deserve the same rights and opportunities as men. And in the 19th century, her ideas about equality for women inspired early leaders of the women's rights movement in the United States.
All right, looking at the lesson summary. In this lesson, you learned about the Enlightenment, a new way of thinking that began in Europe in the late 1600s and became widespread in the 1700s. The roots of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment grew out of the Renaissance and the Scientific Revolution. Much Enlightenment thinking challenged accepted beliefs. Enlightenment philosophers wanted to apply the ideas and methods of the Scientific Revolution to problems of government and society.
All right, Enlightenment thinkers. Thomas Hobbs used logic and his observations to reach conclusions about government. John Locke championed the rights to life, liberty, and property. Montesquieu argued for a separation of powers in government. Voltaire championed religious tolerance and free speech. And Cesar Beccaria called for reform in criminal law to protect the rights of the accused.
The impact of the Enlightenment on government. Modern views of government owe a great deal to Enlightenment thinkers. The Enlightenment influenced monarchs in Europe, especially enlightened despots. and greatly affected revolutions in the American colonies and in France.
Finally, women of the Enlightenment. Several women, such as Abigail Adams, Olympia de Gouges, and Mary Wollstonecraft, worked to extend the ideas of liberty and equality to women.
All right, guys, going back to the guiding question, how have the ideas of the Enlightenment influenced modern governments?
All right, you guys, and vocabulary again: Bill of Rights, constitutional monarchy, despotism, enlightenment, natural rights, religious tolerance, social contract, and separation of powers. Hasta luego, you guys.
All right, guys, don't leave me hanging.